Looking for an EHR that's built for the way therapists work? From automated scheduling and billing to customizable notes and treatment plans, Simple Practice gives you everything you need right at your fingertips. Learn more at simplepractice.com.
Today's episode is brought to you by Powbox, a HIPAA-compliant email security platform built specifically for healthcare providers. Powbox helps therapists secure every email they send and receive through Google Workspace and Microsoft 365. Our listeners can get $250 off an annual plan with promo code MODERN.
You're listening to the Modern Therapist Survival Guide, where therapists live, breathe, and practice as human beings. To support you as a whole person and a therapist, here are your hosts, Curt Widhelm and Katie Vernoy.
Welcome back, Modern Therapists. This is the Modern Therapist Survival Guide. I'm Curt Widhelm with Katie Vernoy, and this is the podcast for therapists about the things that go on in our lives, our professional lives, the things that we do, the things that we tell the youngsters coming up in our profession. And a lot of times it's just something around just pay your dues. But what if your dues are six-figure debt that just follows you seemingly for the rest of your life and can't be discharged in bankruptcy or anything like that? And of course, student loans is what we're talking about. And we are joined today by Mick MacLaverty to talk about student loan debt, talk about the way that it impacts us. And I'm sure that this will be a conversation that we weave into a bunch of future episodes as well. So thank you very much for joining us and sharing some of your expertise on this.
Absolutely. Happy to be here.
So we're excited to jump into this conversation because it's such a huge problem in our profession. But before we get to the meat of this conversation, let's ask you the question we ask all of our guests, which is, who are you and what are you putting out into the world?
I'm Mick MacLaverty. I founded Highway Benefits. We help companies basically contribute to their employees' student loans, and founded the company about just over 5 years ago. And I'm trying to put out into the world that there are solutions to navigating student debt, and it doesn't need to be a, everlasting problem in your life. I guess that's the short and sweet version of it.
A very long time ago, and I'm thinking about kind of when we started this podcast, which was forever ago, we talk about how the cost of becoming a therapist used to be like a cup of coffee. And over time, educational expenses have grown, higher education expenses in general have. You add on professional grad school, it gets a lot more. Most of our listeners are probably aware that student loan debt is a thing. From your perspective, is it that therapists need to know about student loan debt today?
I think it's good to just have a general everyone knows that student debt exists, and it's it's in the news more prevalently now. It's almost every day you can log into CNBC or Bloomberg and read an article or two about student debt. But I do think it's good to know just like a general understanding of the impact that student debt has, and then more specifically, what industries are kind of targeted for student debt. So I think it's good to at least get a holistic picture of what's going on in order to at least get some kind of grasp or comprehend, like, how does my situation kind of compare to other individuals or other industries? And then, I'll just quickly say one thing. Guidelines on student debt generally suggest that 10 to 15% of your take-home pay or income should be allocated to paying off your student debt. But now that's kind of changing, and specifically within therapy, it's a bit challenging, given that if you have $1,000 a month payment, that math becomes challenging for everyone in the industry. So I think it's just good to know that, like, the debt averages, the levels that people are taking, and the way that the industry is structured, it's just kind of creating a bit more of a problem. So a bit of a ramble, but just I think it's good for people to get a holistic picture of not just yourself or your industry, but just like general practices and like, what is student debt, how many people have it, et cetera.
So what is student debt? How many people have it?
It's a great question. They're about, estimates are about 46 million people right now. So this is a uniquely US problem as well. Does exist in Canada and UK and Australia as well. But the way that it works here creates kind of a unique problem. So there are about 46 million people. There's about $1.7 trillion of student debt. So there's been about $1 trillion of student debt added in the last 12, 13 years. So almost $100 billion of student debt gets underwritten a year. A lot of people probably know this, but in 2020, the federal government actually paused payments on student loans and federal interest rates on student debt. So if you held a federal loan, so about 93% of all student debt, 94% is held at the federal level. You didn't need to make a payment and your interest didn't accrue. And that got extended, I think, 8 or 9 times until kind of October of 2023, but then kind of October of 2024. And then now each subsequent month, more and more people have to make their payments again and interest is starting to accrue. So for instance, anyone involved in the SAVE plan had their interest resume starting August 1st. And that was about 8 million people last month, their interest resumed. So this is not a small issue. It's about 1 in 3 workers in the US has student debt.
How do you see this affecting therapy professionals, healthcare professionals, as some of this stuff comes back into line?
Yeah, I like to kind of back to what I previously said. I like to look at the averages, which everyone thinks is out of control anyway. So it's just good to take the baseline average and then benchmark certain industries to that. So in that frame of reference, almost, 1 in 3 workers has student debt. So it's about 30-ish%. The average amount of student debt is about $40-ish thousand. When you look at clinical psychology, for instance, almost 80% have one student loan. So almost triple, right? And then in terms of the dollar amount, it's almost $80,000. So more than double the average. So when you think about specific industries, others are worse actually. But when you think about therapy in this industry, it's like it is one of the industries that is more effective because of graduate schools and because of the pay structure in the business. So I think that's something that I like to think about. Again, it's like holistic picture, look at the averages, benchmark against that.
So more therapists have more debt.
Precisely.
So what does that mean? Like, what does that actually look like?
It means a few things. And again, there are other industries that are kind of worse. And worse is also a relative term because is taking on more debt bad if you know that you're going to make a lot more money. So for instance, if you're going to be a medical doctor, a veterinarian, dentists actually take on average, the most student debt. They take on almost $300,000 of student debt. But 3 years after they graduate, the income levels are quite high. So the payback or the ability to pay the debt back is not as significant of an issue. Whereas for therapy, not even just clinical therapy, but even like physical therapy, occupational therapy, the requirement of grad schools and the way that the industries are structured does actually make it more challenging. So I think when I look at different industries or how the impact of student debt has really affected people, one very interesting thing that we've seen is that when you have an industry where the revenue generators are salaried employees, student debt payback is actually not as challenging or not as difficult. So dentists, veterinary, they take on extraordinary amounts of debt. But the industry works in such a way that over 5-10 years, they'll likely pay that debt off. Whereas in industries like physical therapy, clinical therapy, marriage counseling, et cetera, where the revenue generators are hourly or visit-based, that creates a significant issue because of the way insurance reimbursement works or other things like that. So it's really it's not just the total debt amount, it's the delta between student debt and income potential. That's where the major problems can exist.
As a therapist, your time is precious, and Simple Practice helps you protect it. Their new AI-powered note taker creates structured progress notes in minutes, so you can wrap up sessions and move on with your day. Easy-to-use billing features take the hassle out of getting paid, even when insurance is involved.
Another great perk, scheduling is simple for you and your clients with unlimited automated appointment reminders. Make the most of every day with an all in one practice management solution that lets you focus on the work that matters most, connecting with your clients. Join over 225,000 practitioners who trust Simple Practice to keep their day running smoothly. Start today at simplepractice.com.
So not only are we not paid well or paid consistently, we have more debt to pay off.
Correct. And on a relative basis, it's much more debt to pay off. And you said a very striking word, which is inconsistency. And student debt wants you to be paying back monthly limits. And so when you're not salaried or you don't have like a consistent and you don't know, every 2 weeks what your kind of take home can be or will be, it creates just kind of a challenging position to put clinicians in, for sure.
This is sure depressing.
That's not the goal. The goal is, again, to educate and just, give background and insight so that you can plan accordingly. There are solutions, which we can talk about later, but apologies for the depressing nature of what we do. This is what I deal in every day.
Some of the stuff does really start with some of the federal policies around things. I know a lot of colleagues have either completed public student loan forgiveness in order to be able to address some of these issues. And then administration changes and programs such as those end up becoming questionable, even for people who've already committed in them. Can you talk about how federal policy and the zeitgeist around student debt has really evolved over the last 5 years?
Yeah, for sure. I live in two worlds. One, I'm a debt holder, and two, I try to be, and for our company, we try to be as objective as we possibly can. And so generally, the people, and more importantly, parents, are really starting to take a hard look at, is this worth it? Right? I think specifically in the last 5 years, things have gotten so bad that people are looking at alternative options, looking at trade schools, looking at, is this worth it? Do I as a parent want to take on a Parent Plus loan for my child who is 18 years old, who, by the way, is going to college to try to learn and become passionate about some subject so that they can go and then become prepared and get a job in that specific field? I think a big one when you think about things is kind of like coding schools in the 2010s is a good example of this. A lot of people were saying, or freshmen, sophomores in college, kind of saw the writing on the wall. I'm going to take on another $100,000 of student debt over the next 2 years to get some kind of undefined job that I don't know what I'm going to get. Maybe I should go to a coding school where I can actually learn something and then go work for a big tech company, which, by the way, pays really well and has great benefits, insurance, et cetera. So in terms of federal policy affecting things, specifically within the past 5 years, I think it's really, people are really, really, there's always been talk, but people are really examining, is this worth it? Is this what I want to put myself through? Is this what I want to put my child through? And I think when parents come into play and start questioning, is it worth it? That's when it's very unique. It used to be individuals kind of saying, I don't know if it's worth it. There are all these other paths I can try it. But I think parents kind of stepping in and also being like, I have to pay, $250,000 for this ticket for my kid to go graduate. And also I don't know what the job market's like out there. I got let go from my job. So it makes people think twice about just writing that blank check or taking on that student loan.
Why have education costs gotten so huge? And I'm thinking about, especially for the profession that Curt and I are in, there's very expensive graduate programs that folks are kind of having to navigate in order to get to the career that they're looking for. And kind of to respond to what you just said, there's a lot of folks who say, yeah, I don't know if financially this feels worth it, but this is my life passion. This is what I need to be. I'm a therapist. I have to learn how to be a therapist. And so there's not a lot of other options. And so back to the question, why is this so bad? Why is it so expensive to get education to do a job?
So I I believe there is not a one decision pinpoint that says if we had made this one decision differently, things wouldn't be this bad. I believe this is a true series of decisions made over the past 50 years, culminating in this current climate or this current issue. Although there is no one root cause per se, I think there are a few chapters of the last 40, 50 years that have led to the current state. The earliest one being the debate on whether Americans have a right to a secondary education. This was something that goes back to, before Reagan. This goes back before Carter. And ultimately, the federal government decided to underwrite student debt, and at a massive scale with unique underwriting policies. And it's also an interesting thing to underwrite, given that the asset backing underwriting this loan is your brain. So it wasn't right or wrong that we made college more accessible. It happened. I'd say there are kind of like four major chapters. One is kind of that decision that, yes, we should make it easier for everyone to go to school. Two is kind of just the general cost, which is kind of like a chicken and egg thing, because money is basically free for universities and there are no checks and balances. So as they can take more money, grow administrations, like they'll take it all day long. And so the cost of education didn't really matter. They didn't really care that. So our benefit is interesting. Companies can pay up to $5,250 tax-free to their employees' loans. That was based on 1986 cost of an average semester of college. Like, it has dramatically changed in the last 30 or 40 years, how the cost of education has just become insane. A third piece is kind of the federal government's underwriting process. When I took on a loan for the first time, I was in business school and I knew exactly what I was going to do with this money that I was spending on getting educated. You sign a piece of paper and you get 20 grand in your checking account. Like, it blew my mind. Like, that was it. Like, no cosign, no anything, no like test I need to take. So I think the underwriting processes are interesting. And then another reason why things have gotten really bad is that, which is a tough one, is that the general kind of belief or truth that college or education does create upward mobility. On average, like, blanketly, you do want a really good higher education system in your country because it does generally equate to more prosperous life, more success, money, whatever it is. So I think, but at the same time, not taking the hard truth and the hard look at things, like, is this on an individual basis the necessary thing for me to do? I know I just rambled at you, but I'd say those are kind of the four principal chapters of how did we get here? Why did this happen?
A lot of the discussion that we hear in our community is about how the loan process is predatory. A lot of the universities, because money is free, can raise tuition costs. And some of the things that you're talking about are kind of on these more societal level numbers. And in general, do people tend to be pretty poor at translating some of those societal numbers down to their own individual abilities to apply that to themselves and to their future?
There's a big trend going on now regarding individuals at a young age being financially literate. And I think it's something that is never really taught in schools. It's something that is never brought to the forefront unless your parents brought it to your forefront, right? There's no like class you take in fourth grade or, eighth grade or in high school that teaches you financial accounting and what you should and should not do. So that's like kind of one piece of it. I think now people are realizing that should either change or I do also semi believe that back when the dollar amounts were a bit lower, taking on a loan was kind of the education in itself. Taking on a loan that, you knew you could pay back, and the math kind of worked out. The mathed, as they say. 20, 30, 40 years ago, the math kind of worked out. And so you didn't have to question the system of, do I have to, is this loan going to put me into financial disarray? That education in itself doesn't really exist anymore, because I think people have lost a lot of trust because the math doesn't work out. You can't go through that experience of learning. You're just kind of thrown into the learned experience that it doesn't work out. So I think something switched in the last 20, 30 years. There probably wasn't a specific focal point of when the math stopped working on average, but there's a balance between education is going through the thing on your own and learning from experience. And now, because the math doesn't really work out, maybe there is some sort of mandatory financial literacy piece that has to happen to everyone at a younger age. I don't know if that completely answers your question, but generally speaking, I think there has been kind of a shift from learn via experience to now oh, we actually have to educate people on financial literacy.
If you're a therapist in private practice, email is probably one of your biggest compliance risks. What most therapists don't know is that Gmail and Outlook are not fully compliant on their own. Powbox helps you secure every email you send and receive by ensuring outbound email is automatically encrypted and delivered directly to your client's inbox. No portals or passwords required. You can do all this without changing your tools or how you work. Powbox works seamlessly with your existing Google Workspace or Microsoft 365 account.
Powbox also protects your inbox from phishing and malicious emails that target healthcare practices. Setup is fast, there's no training required, and Powbox's US-based team is ready to help if you need it. As a Modern Therapist Survival Guide listener, you can get $250 off an annual Powbox plan. Just visit powbox.com, that's Paubox, and use promo code MODERN to get started.
It almost seems like a secret handshake that parents teach children. If you have financial literacy, then you teach it to your kids, but it's not really common knowledge. I think there's cultural differences on how money is seen. And so there's so much that I think leads to the decision making around whether someone takes on student loan debt. It feels even more specific for our profession. And I don't know if this is something that you're aware of, Mick, but I think there's this element where there are some programs that feel more financially approachable. They have different ways they're run. That I was fortunate to get into one of those programs. And it was also a million years ago, so the math was mathing. But I think there was this element of, we know that there is a shortage of mental health providers, or it feels like a shortage, even though some folks think that there's not, but there's a mental health shortage. And there's not really capacity for folks to go into these more reasonably priced programs. And so there's so many programs that are hugely expensive, private programs that are hugely expensive. And so I think that's where folks get stuck, is that I can either be a therapist and take on hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of debt, or I don't get to be a therapist. There's not really another option. And so they're stuck with this thing that doesn't work, and move forward and just kind of get used to the idea that I will be paying off my student loan debt for the rest of my life, as Curt was mentioning before. And so it feels very daunting. It feels like a huge sacrifice, which, as mental health professionals, we're pretty self-sacrificial. So maybe that feeds something. But it feels like a really awful problem for us to be in. I mean, Curt and I talk about, from our angle, how do you make a more livable wage? How do you help on the back end get to that more consistent income that looks more like something where you can pay down your student loan debt? But I don't think that's sufficient for the gravity of the problem that we're facing in our profession.
Yeah, I agree with pretty much everything you're saying. It's a challenge. I mean, there's no right answer. Every situation is unique too. It's a challenge. It's also, you're not alone. There are other industries that are very similar. There are other industries too that there are other solutions that are even worse sometimes. So, you can have someone pay for your school and then they take a piece of your profits for the next like 30 years of your life, if that's
Oof.
another option. So like there are other things that, it's never as bad as you think it is. It's never as good as you think it is. Everyone's in their own financial issues pending what they have signed up for, what they want to do. Yes, therapy generally, I mean, the statistics I read off to you earlier are pretty damning. But again, like there are some ones that are worse, like physical therapy on average or occupational therapy on average is a little bit worse. They take on an average of like $150,000 or $140,000 of debt. So $60K more on average per therapist. So this isn't to say the problem doesn't exist, because it definitely does. But I think in collective understanding and individuals kind of coming together and sharing their experiences, I think there are ways to kind of get out of debt. I think there are ways to think about it maybe more as you're in school. And I think, knowledge is power. So knowledge sharing is huge across any industry. So I think people should there should be no stigma about student debt. You should talk about it. What are my options? How can I navigate through this?
I think the other part of the zeitgeist that we haven't really talked about directly, but have alluded to a little bit, in some of the administration changes, there was discussion of student loan forgiveness, and then there was kind of the political divide around whether or not that was fair. And I don't know if you have any comments on it, but I think that I don't want to leave that out of the conversation, because it feels like
Yeah.
this is also an emotionally charged and or politically charged topic, where trying to find solutions for student loan debt or trying to find options that don't accrue so much debt seem to be thrown around without a lot of information and not a lot of knowledge.
Yeah. I definitely can talk. I could talk about this specifically for like 4.5 hours, but the the it's a very interesting thing is that student debt is political in the sense that either political party can attach themselves to it and get votes. So people don't know this, but actually, like George Bush, Republican Party, created a lot of these public service forgiveness plans. So it was it was their thing, and then forgiveness became a Democratic thing. Like student debt is a thing, and it's kind of like who's going to grab it first, and different parties can grab it at different times. So that's one thing that people should acknowledge, is that this isn't a Republican or Democrat thing. It is a thing that either party can grab based on whatever, election year it is. So that's one thing to note. Two, it's unfortunate because these are people's lives. This should not be a political thing. There should be more transparency about what people should be doing with student debt. So for instance, from our perspective, student debt was never going to be canceled. There's no way. People have tried it forever. It's at the time when we started our company, there was almost 10-ish trillion dollars of federal budget deficit at the time. So student debt accounted for 15% of the whole federal budget deficit. The federal government can't just let their balance sheet go out the window. Like they need the money. You can't just like wash away 15% of your debt. It's just, you need that revenue. So if you think about it like that, that's one thing. And then two, it has to go through Congress. They have the power of the purse. You can't just broad sweeping give forgiveness to people because Congress touches the money. Like that's just how it works. So from our perspective, we knew it would never really happen. The unfortunate piece is that it kept getting discussed and that it like potentially would happen. And so instead of people paying off, when loans were paused for 3 years and no interest was accruing on debt and interest rates were zero for all intents and purposes, every dollar you paid back to your loan was going to the principal of the loan. People could have gotten out of debt like years and tens of thousands of dollars less paid interest had this promise of student debt being forgiven just not happen. So, it's things like that should have been more highly discussed. Like, if you pay off your loan now, there's no interest accruing and there are no payments due. If you, you know, and also maybe refi instead of a 7-8%, student loan, you can refi at 2-3%, 4%. And so you're chipping off your interest payments by a lot when the debt does resume. So I'm rambling again, but my point is that I don't love that student debt has become a pseudo politicized thing, because you're really messing with people's financials. And what we should be doing is educating people on stuff like that, like refi to get a lower rate, pay down your debt when no interest is due because the money's going to the principal, which reduces the actual balloon of the debt. Things like that are what should be talked about. Instead, it's kind of like, whatever's clickbaity and you want to, spread on the news. Those are without getting too deep into it, those are my general thoughts on forgiveness and stuff like that. But there are good policies like public service loan forgiveness, income-driven repayment plans, which are going to get whittled down to just a few here. But there are still some good things that federal policy has put in place over the last 20 years that help people reduce their burden.
For people who don't have the opportunity to get educated before they take out loans, such as those who are currently paying off and delaying major life events, such as buying homes and marriage and having kids in some cases, do you have other suggestions on how people can really take control of their financial situations?
Yeah, there are a lot of options. It depends on kind of where you are in your education journey, whether you're a, 18-year-old who's about to take on a loan for the first time, or whether you're, 45 and you've been paying off your debt for the last 20 plus years. There are different things you could do. So one is, let's say you've taken on a loan, weigh refinancing your debt versus the federal programs to reduce your payments. Refinancing can get you a lower rate, which can reduce your monthly, but then you have to pay it every month. Versus if you hold a federal loan, maybe you qualify for certain programs that can reduce your monthly payment, but you may be paying for a longer. So that's like, there are only decisions. There's no right thing to do. It's just kind of opportunity cost of what's right for that person. There are other services and things you can do, like collective bargaining for student loans. There are companies that help people basically form together and go back to the underwriters and say, hey, look at our bucket of loans. We'd like collectively a lower rate. That's an interesting thing to do. What we do at Highway is employer-driven plans. So we help companies. People don't know this, but companies can actually help pay off your student debt, and every dollar they contribute, it's actually tax-free income for you, the employee, up to $5,250. So your employer can actually help you with this problem. It's also tax-free for your company. They don't pay payroll taxes on any of the contribution dollars. There are a handful of things you can do. We'd love to help, obviously. And we do. We work with a lot of healthcare tangential businesses, we call them. So therapy-related businesses. There's no right answer, but I think it's, where you are in your journey. Are you just taking on a loan? Okay, let's be educated. Let's think about this. Are there things I can do while I'm in school to help pay off that debt? 2, I've already paid my loan. Should I be refinancing? Should I look at these collective bargaining things? And then 3, other sources of repayment outside of yourself. Your company, your employer can actually help you get out of debt years ahead of time, paying tens of thousands of dollars less in interest. So I think it's just learning, doing the research, and thinking of alternate sources to help you reduce that payment.
So tell us more about what the specific plan that you help folks implement, because I think that when we talked about it before, a few weeks ago, it was very interesting. I had never heard about it in kind of the loan repayment thing. I've heard folks talk about upfront that same $5,200 whatever dollar amounts people can get help going to school, but I hadn't heard about this loan repayment benefit.
Yeah, so we fall under Section 127 of the IRS code. So in 2020, the federal government actually made what we do tax-free. You've probably heard about tuition reimbursement. So if you want to go to school, your company can reimburse you up to $5,250. In 2020, the federal government made what we do part of Section 127. And actually, the new bill, the new tax bill, actually made what we do permanent. So going forward, and they're going to increase the limit every year based on inflation. And so what we do is we work with companies and organizations, a lot of private practices, who are trying to attract and retain their employees. We are an employee benefit. Given specific industries like yours, I mean, this is a huge topic. This is something that is on the minds of, like I said, 80% of clinicians. And so when it comes to attracting employees or, helping retain those employees, helping contribute to their student debt in a tax-free way is huge. And so what we do is we help companies set up their 127 plans so that they're compliant with the IRS in order to roll the benefit out. And then what we do is we administer the benefit. So we move money from company into the employee's loan servicers so the employees don't pocket the cash and go run off and do stuff with it. We make sure that the money goes to the desired location, and we basically make it as seamless as possible for companies to set this benefit up. It's a great recruiting tool. You can, market it. And we like to tell people that if you don't offer the benefit, how many of your, top of funnel prospects who you're trying to hire aren't even looking at you? There are also different ways to make it cost effective as well. So that's high level what we do at Highway.
If you could give one piece of advice to our listeners today that can make things kind of an actionable step if they're working for themselves, kind of self-employed people who are still dealing with their own student loan debt, what would you advise them to do?
Call your servicer, probably. I mean, these servicers you can think of as, or call your loan holder. You're entitled to speak with them, and they're knowledgeable. This is their business. They hold your loan. You should see what other options you have. You should see when your payments are due. I think you have to think that work with them instead of against them. That's probably step one. Start at the root. Who has your loan? Call your servicer. The reps there actually, they know what they're doing. They know different options you may or may not have. And I think that's a really good place to start.
Where can people find out more about you and all the wonderful things that you're doing?
Yeah, highwaybenefits.com. Come check us out. We would love to help you. Again, our benefit is more for companies, obviously, but we do have some resources and a whole blog of different articles that could help individual loan holders as well, just learn more about student debt and different options they may have. But yeah, we'd love to have people come visit us, highwaybenefits.com. And if you're interested in learning more, we'd love to chat.
And we will include a link to that in our show notes over at mtsgpodcast.com. And make sure that you follow us on our social media. Join our Facebook group, the Modern Therapist Group, to continue on with this conversation as well as many others. And until next time, I'm Curt Widhelm with Katie Vernoy and Mick MacLaverty.
Over 225,000 practitioners already use Simple Practice to grow their business and simplify admin tasks that take time away from their clients. Isn't it time your EHR worked as hard as you do? Find out more at simplepractice.com.
Thanks again to our sponsor, Powbox, helping therapists secure every email they send and receive. Get $250 off an annual plan with promo code MODERN. Visit powbox.com, that's PAUBOX.com, to protect your practice and your clients.
Thank you for listening to the Modern Therapist Survival Guide. Learn more about who we are and what we do at mtsgpodcast.com. You can also join us on Facebook and Twitter. And please don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any of our episodes.